Staff Sergeant James Cooper wiped the sweat from his forehead as he pulled into the parking lot of Highland Park. The summer heat was intense, but he had promised his daughter Emma a trip to the playground, and he never broke promises. After spending 2 long tours in Afghanistan, he understood the value of these simple moments with his 6-year-old daughter. The playground was surprisingly empty for a Sunday afternoon. Only a few parents watched their children climb the colorful equipment, while others pushed strollers along the walking path. James smiled as Emma bounced excitedly in her car seat, her brown pigtails swaying with each movement. "Remember the rules, sweetheart?" James asked as he helped her out of the car. His military habits of establishing clear guidelines never quite left him, even in civilian life. "Yes, Daddy, stay where you can see me, and don't talk to strangers," Emma recited proudly, adjusting her pink butterfly t-shirt. Her sneakers lit up with each step as they walked toward the playground. James found a bench with a clear view of the entire area. His tactical awareness remained sharp even 3 years after leaving active duty. He watched Emma run toward the slide, her laughter mixing with the sounds of other children playing. A gentle breeze carried the scent of nearby flowering trees, and for a moment, James felt completely at peace. The peaceful atmosphere was occasionally broken by the distant rumble of motorcycles on the highway. James noticed a few parents glancing nervously in that direction, but he remained focused on Emma. She had made friends with a little boy around her age, and they were taking turns on the monkey bars. As he watched his daughter play, James couldn't help but reflect on how different this was from his life just a few years ago. The sounds of children laughing had replaced the echo of gunfire, and the weight of his daughter's small hand had replaced the familiar weight of his rifle. He touched the Marine Corps tattoo on his forearm, a habit he'd developed when lost in thought. A young mother sitting nearby offered him a friendly smile as her toddler waved at Emma. James nodded politely, maintaining his usual quiet demeanor. He checked his watch. They had been at the park for nearly an hour, but Emma showed no signs of tiring. Her energy seemed endless as she raced from the swings to the climbing dome. The sun continued to beat down, and James pulled 2 water bottles from his backpack. He called Emma over, knowing the importance of staying hydrated in this heat. She ran to him, her cheeks flushed with excitement and exercise. "Daddy, can we stay just a little longer?" Emma pleaded, taking big gulps of water. "Tyler wants to show me how to cross the bridge backwards." James chuckled, ruffling her hair affectionately. "10 more minutes, princess. Then we need to head home for dinner." He watched her sprint back to her new friend, her joy evident in every step. Little did James know that this peaceful afternoon was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would remind him that sometimes a soldier's instincts and training were just as necessary in civilian life as they were on the battlefield. The peaceful atmosphere at Highland Park shattered with the thunderous roar of multiple motorcycles. 5 riders on heavy bikes pulled into the parking lot, their engines deliberately revving loud enough to make several children cover their ears. James instantly recognized the Steel Wolves patches on their leather vests, a local gang known for causing trouble in the area. The bikers dismounted, their boots crunching on the gravel as they swaggered toward the playground. Their leader, a tall man with a snake tattoo crawling up his neck, cracked open a beer and lit a cigarette, deliberately ignoring the "no alcohol" and "no smoking" signs posted nearby. The other 4 followed suit, forming a loose semicircle near the playground equipment. James watched as parents began gathering their children, hurriedly leaving the park. The young mother he'd noticed earlier clutched her toddler close, fear evident in her quick movements as she tried to reach her car. Emma's new friend Tyler was quickly collected by his father, who cast an apologetic glance in James's direction. "Emma," James called calmly, his voice carrying across the playground. "Come here, sweetheart." He kept his eyes on the bikers as his daughter ran to him, confusion clear on her small face. "But Daddy, I was playing with Tyler," Emma protested, not understanding why her friend had left so suddenly. James positioned himself between Emma and the bikers, his military training automatically assessing the situation. The gang members were now laughing and shoving each other, their voices growing louder as they finished their beers. The leader, whom the others called Snake, crushed his can and threw it toward a trash bin, missing deliberately. He noticed James watching and sneered, nudging his companions. "Got a problem, Boy Scout?" Snake called out, his words slightly slurred. The other bikers snickered, spreading out as they approached James and Emma. The playground equipment now stood empty, the only sounds coming from the creaking of swing chains in the breeze. James remained seated on the bench, his posture relaxed but alert. He could feel Emma's small hands gripping the back of his shirt, and he reached back to reassure her with a gentle pat. His mind quickly calculated distances and angles, just as he had done countless times in combat situations. "Daddy, I'm scared," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. James could feel her pressing closer against his back. "It's okay, Princess," James replied softly, never taking his eyes off the approaching bikers. "Everything's going to be fine." He noticed that Snake carried a chain wrapped around his fist, while another biker was fidgeting with something in his pocket. The young mother with the toddler was still struggling with her car seat, her hands shaking as she tried to secure her child. Snake noticed her too, and a cruel smile spread across his face as he changed direction, heading toward her instead. James stood up slowly, his muscles tense beneath his casual clothing. "Emma," he said quietly, "go sit in our car and lock the doors. Remember how we practiced?" She nodded, tears in her eyes but brave like her father had taught her. James watched from the corner of his eye as she quickly made her way to their vehicle, making sure she got in safely before turning his full attention back to the situation at hand. Snake and two of his gang members approached the young mother, who was still struggling with her car seat. Her toddler had started crying, sensing his mother's fear. James moved quietly but purposefully across the parking lot, his combat boots making no sound on the asphalt. "Need some help with that, sweetheart?" Snake's voice dripped with false concern as he leaned against the woman's car. She froze, clutching her child closer. The toddler's cries grew louder. "Please," she whispered, "just let us leave." Her hands were shaking so badly now that she dropped her keys. When she bent to retrieve them, Snake kicked them under the car. "Now look what you did," Snake laughed, his gang members joining in. "Guess you'll have to stay and chat with us for a while." He reached out to touch the woman's face, but his hand never made contact. James appeared between them, his movement so smooth it took Snake a moment to realize someone had interrupted his fun. The former Marine's voice was calm, but carried the weight of authority that made two of the bikers take an instinctive step back. "The lady wants to leave," James stated simply. "And you're going to let her." His eyes, hard as steel, locked onto Snake's. The gang leader's confident smirk faltered slightly. Behind James, the young mother quickly retrieved her keys from under the car. Without taking his eyes off Snake, James spoke to her quietly. "Ma'am, please get in your car now." Snake's face twisted with anger at being challenged. He straightened up, trying to use his height advantage over James. "This ain't your business, Jarhead," he spat, noticing James's Marine Corps tattoo. "Walk away while you still can." The remaining two bikers had circled around, creating a loose ring around James. The chain around Snake's fist clinked ominously as he adjusted his grip. From the car behind him, James could hear Emma calling out in fear, "Daddy." "Last chance," James offered, his voice still eerily calm. "Leave the park, and we all go home without trouble." He remained perfectly still, but his posture had subtly shifted into a defensive stance. Snake laughed, but there was a note of uncertainty in it now. Something about the way the shorter man stood, completely unfazed by being surrounded, made him hesitate. The former Marine's eyes never blinked, never wavered, reminding Snake of a documentary he'd once watched about wolves before they attacked. "You're outnumbered 5-1, tough guy," Snake growled, trying to reassert his authority in front of his gang. He took a threatening step forward, raising his chain-wrapped fist. James didn't move except to turn his head slightly, making sure the young mother had managed to get into her car. He heard her engine start and the sound of tires on gravel as she drove away. Only then did he allow himself a small smile, the kind of smile that had made hardened Taliban fighters reconsider their choices in Afghanistan. 5-1, James replied quietly. "Those odds aren't really fair." He paused, his smile growing slightly. "For you." Snake's face contorted with rage at James's calm confidence. Without warning, he swung his chain-wrapped fist in a wide arc aimed at James's head. The former Marine didn't even blink, he simply wasn't there anymore. Snake's momentum carried him forward as his target stepped smoothly aside, leaving the gang leader off balance. Two other bikers rushed forward, thinking to overwhelm James with numbers. Their mistake became apparent as James moved with the fluid precision of a man who had spent years training for combat. He caught the first attacker's wrist, using the man's own momentum to send him crashing into his companion. Both went down in a tangle of limbs and cursing. Emma watched from the car, her hands pressed against the window as her father moved like she'd never seen before. This wasn't the gentle dad who made her pancakes on Sunday mornings. This was Staff Sergeant Cooper, and he was in his element. The fourth biker pulled out a switchblade, its click echoing in the parking lot. James recognized the sound instantly, memories of close quarters combat training flooding back. The biker lunged forward, blade flashing in the afternoon sun. James stepped inside the man's reach, his left hand deflecting the knife arm while his right delivered a precise strike to the biker's solar plexus. The switchblade clattered to the ground as its owner doubled over, gasping for air. James kicked the weapon away, sending it sliding under a nearby car. Snake, having recovered his balance, circled more cautiously now, his chain swinging in slow arcs. "Not so tough without your whole gang backing you up, are you?" James asked quietly, keeping all 5 men in his field of vision. The 2 he'd knocked down earlier were struggling to their feet, but their movements were hesitant now. Snake spat on the ground, his face red with humiliation. "You're dead, Jarhead." He charged forward, chain whipping through the air. James waited until the last possible moment before moving, his timing honed by years of hand-to-hand combat training. The chain whistled past his ear as James stepped inside Snake's guard, his elbow connected with the gang leader's solar plexus, followed by a precise knee strike that sent Snake stumbling backward. The chain slipped from his grasp, clattering on the asphalt. The 5th biker, who had been hanging back, suddenly pulled something from his jacket, a small revolver that gleamed dully in the sunlight. James's eyes narrowed as he calculated distances and angles, his mind already mapping out the fastest route to disarm the armed threat. "Stop right there," a new voice commanded. Red and blue lights suddenly flooded the parking lot as 2 police cruisers pulled in, sirens wailing. The biker with the gun froze, caught in the act of raising his weapon. From her safe position in the car, Emma cheered as she watched the police officers quickly take control of the situation. Her father remained perfectly still, hands raised to show the officers he wasn't a threat, but his eyes never left the armed biker until the police had secured the weapon. The police officers moved with practiced efficiency, securing the scene within minutes. Officer Sarah Martinez, a veteran of the force, approached James while her colleagues handcuffed the bikers. She noticed his calm demeanor and military bearing immediately. "Sir, I'm Officer Martinez. We received multiple 911 calls about a disturbance," she said, notebook in hand. "Could you tell me what happened here?" Behind her, Snake was loudly protesting as he was led to a patrol car. James explained the situation concisely, his military training evident in his clear, precise report. "I was here with my daughter when these men arrived. They were harassing park visitors, including a young mother with a toddler. When I intervened, they became violent." He gestured toward the scattered evidence, the chain, the switchblade under the car, and the revolver now secured by the police. Emma remained in their car until Officer Martinez personally went to check on her. The little girl's eyes were wide but dry. She hadn't cried once during the entire incident. "My daddy protected everyone," she told the officer proudly. "He's a Marine." More police cars arrived, along with several witnesses who had called 911 before leaving the park. The young mother James had helped returned with her husband, insisting on giving her statement. Her hands were still shaking, but her voice was firm as she described how James had intervened. "That man saved us," she said, pointing to James. "Those bikers were terrorizing everyone, and he stood up to them. He gave me time to get my baby to safety." Officer Martinez listened carefully, taking detailed notes. A park security camera had captured the entire incident, and another officer was already reviewing the footage. The evidence was mounting quickly: the bikers' weapons, multiple witness statements, and clear video documentation of James acting in self-defense while protecting others. Snake and his gang members were read their rights and loaded into separate patrol cars. The gang leader's bravado had evaporated, replaced by sullen silence, as he watched his motorcycle being impounded. The officer checking their IDs discovered outstanding warrants for 2 of the bikers, adding to their troubles. James finally walked over to his car and opened the door. Emma launched herself into his arms, wrapping him in a tight hug. "You were amazing, Daddy," she exclaimed. "You moved so fast, just like a superhero." Officer Martinez couldn't help but smile as she watched the interaction. She'd seen too many situations like this end badly, but James's training and restraint had prevented what could have been a tragedy. She made a note in her report about his professional handling of the situation. "Mr. Cooper," she called out, approaching them one last time, "we'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow to make a formal statement. But I want you to know, you probably saved lives today. Those men had quite a history, and it was only a matter of time before someone got seriously hurt." The next morning, James sat in Detective Michael Chen's office at the police station, reviewing his statement. The security camera footage played on a monitor, showing the incident from multiple angles. Each frame validated James's account of acting in self-defense while protecting others. "This is pretty clear-cut, Mr. Cooper," Detective Chen said, pausing the video. "The cameras caught everything, including the gun and their initial harassment of park visitors. We've also got 15 witness statements backing up your version of events." James nodded quietly, his posture military straight even in the uncomfortable station chair. On the detective's desk lay a thick file about the Steel Wolves gang. Their leader, whose real name was Timothy "Snake" Reeves, had a lengthy criminal record including assault and intimidation charges. "The DA's office is particularly interested in this case," Detective Chen continued, shuffling through some papers. "Turns out your intervention helped us crack open a bigger investigation. The Steel Wolves have been terrorizing parks and public spaces across 3 counties. The detective slid several photographs across his desk. They showed other playgrounds and parks where families had been harassed by the gang. Parents were too scared to bring their kids to these places. Some neighborhoods basically lost their public spaces to these thugs." James studied the photos, his jaw tightening. As a father and a Marine, the thought of families being terrorized in their own communities struck a deep chord. Emma's playground could have become another one of these abandoned spaces if someone hadn't taken a stand. "You're not facing any charges," Detective Chen assured him. "In fact, the young mother you helped, Mrs. Rodriguez, wants to thank you personally. She's organized a community meeting at the city council tonight. Seems like your actions sparked something bigger than just stopping a few troublemakers." Later that afternoon, James received calls from his old Marine unit. The video had gone viral, showing a veteran standing up to playground bullies. Local news vans gathered outside his house, but James declined interviews. He didn't consider himself a hero. He'd simply done what any Marine would do. Emma's school principal called too, praising her bravery during the incident. She hadn't panicked or left the car, following her father's instructions perfectly. The principal wanted James to speak at an assembly about community safety and standing up to bullies. "Your combat training showed impressive restraint," Detective Chen commented, rewinding the footage. "You've had multiple opportunities to seriously harm them, but you chose to use minimal force." He paused the video where James had disarmed the knife-wielding biker. "That's exactly the kind of judgment we need more of." The city council meeting room buzzed with energy as residents packed the space, many standing along the walls. Mrs. Rodriguez stood at the podium, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd about the playground incident. Her toddler sat quietly in her husband's lap, playing with a toy car. "One man's courage changed everything," she said, gesturing toward James, who sat quietly in the back row. "Before this, we were all too scared to stand up to the Steel Wolves. They took our parks, our peace of mind, and our children's right to play safely." The police chief stepped forward next, sharing statistics that shocked many residents. The Steel Wolves have been involved in over 50 incidents of harassment and intimidation across the region. Since James's confrontation with them, dozens of victims had come forward with new information. "Thanks to Mr. Cooper's actions and the evidence gathered, we've arrested 12 more gang members," the chief announced. "Their leadership is in custody, and their operations have been effectively shut down." James listened as more community members spoke, including parents, teachers, and local business owners. Each had a story about how the gang had affected their lives. Emma sat beside him, holding his hand proudly as people praised her father's bravery. The mayor presented a proposal for a new community safety initiative inspired by James's intervention. It included increased police patrols around parks, security camera installations, and a neighborhood watch program. Local martial arts instructors offered free self-defense classes for parents and teens. Mrs. Rodriguez's community group, now called Parks for Families, had already organized cleanup events at playgrounds previously abandoned due to gang activity. Volunteers repainted equipment, planted flowers, and installed new lighting. The Steel Wolves thought they could rule through fear, the police chief continued, but they never counted on facing someone who had faced much worse. Someone who understood that true strength isn't about intimidation, it's about protecting others. James finally agreed to say a few words, though public speaking wasn't his forte. He stood at the podium, his military bearing evident as he addressed the crowd. "I'm not a hero," he began simply. "I'm just a Marine and a father. We all have the power to stand up against bullies. Sometimes it just takes one person to show others it's possible." Emma beamed from her seat, watching her father inspire the community. The local newspaper photographer captured the moment. A quiet warrior who had brought peace back to their parks, and a daughter who would never forget the day her father showed her what real courage looked like. 1 month after the incident, Highland Park had transformed. New families filled the playground, their children's laughter echoing across the renovated space. The Parks for Families initiative had installed better lighting, security cameras, and fresh paint on all the equipment. Flowers bloomed in newly planted gardens, and community volunteers regularly patrolled the area. James and Emma returned to their favorite bench, sharing a packed lunch as they watched kids playing on the swings. The spot where he had confronted the Steel Wolves now featured a small memorial plaque, dedicated to those who stand up for others. James hadn't wanted the recognition, but the community had insisted. "Daddy, look," Emma pointed excitedly. Mrs. Rodriguez was arriving with her toddler, along with several other families they'd met during the past month. The young mother waved warmly, setting up a picnic blanket nearby. Her son, no longer frightened, ran straight to the sandbox. The remaining Steel Wolves members had fled the county after their leaders' arrests. Detective Chen had reported that similar gangs in neighboring areas were disbanding, realizing that communities were no longer easy targets. The viral video of James's intervention had inspired other veterans to organize playground protection groups. Emma's school had started a Community Heroes program where local veterans shared stories about courage and standing up to bullies. James had initially hesitated to participate, but seeing the impact on young minds changed his perspective. The children especially loved when Emma proudly demonstrated the self-defense moves her father had taught her. Mr. Cooper, Tyler, Emma's friend from that fateful day, came running over. "Can you watch me do the monkey bars? I've been practicing." His father followed, carrying bottles of water to share. The two men had become friends, often discussing ways to keep the community safe while their children played. Local businesses had joined the effort, sponsoring weekend events at the park. Today, an ice cream truck played its cheerful tune nearby, and a face painting station was being set up under the shade trees. The once empty playground had become the heart of the community. James watched as Emma showed Tyler her new climbing technique. His Marine Corps training had prepared him for combat, but this peaceful scene of children playing without fear was what he had really fought for. The incident had reminded him that sometimes the most important battles weren't fought in far-off lands, but right here at home. "Thank you, Mr. Cooper," a quiet voice said. He turned to find an elderly woman on a nearby bench. "I bring my grandchildren here now. Before you stood up to those thugs, I was too scared." She smiled, watching the playground fill with happy families. One person really can make a difference. James nodded, understanding that his simple act of courage had created ripples far beyond that single afternoon. As he watched Emma laugh with her friends, he knew that she had learned the most important lesson of all, that true strength wasn't about intimidation or fear, but about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves.